Greetings everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the International Network for Hate Studies for organising this virtual conference and to continuing to support the research that we do in far-right extremism. My name is Dr. Julian Drugan. I'm a Senior Lecturer at Macquarie University in the Department of Security Studies and Criminology. And we'd like to acknowledge the contribution of Dr. Brian Balson-Stanton, a data scientist at Macquarie University, for his contribution to this paper.
And my name is Jade Hutchinson. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Macquarie University and Groningen University in the Netherlands.
So in this paper, we'd like to explore the relationship between the use of emojis and the sharing of emotions online within far-right extremist groups in Australia and also in Canada. We're going to unpack a few of these terms as we go forward. Now, we recognise that social media is an integral feature of far-right groups in Australia and in Canada. Social media followers within these groups, they socialise and they resonate with one another and each other's content via platforms and by the affordances that those platforms provide. Little, however, is known about which affordances most or least appeal to users of far-right extremist groups, how such affordances may influence a user's engagement with far-right themes and narratives, and how this is being experienced in various nations. As we know, due to its scale, but also its popularity, Facebook is one of the most effective communication modalities for fabricating and embedding extremist narratives and imperatives within a population. But we suggest that this process is also aided by emotion-evoking affordances, such as Facebook's reactions. The little emojis, you can see some up there at the top of the screen. And these prompt users to react with and share emotions in response to content, in this case in response to far-right extremist content. So in this research, we assessed the frequency and proportionate use of 6 of these Facebook reaction emojis. You can see them at the top: love, wow, haha, sad, anger and thankful. Across 2 different layers of analysis. We look at them between Australia and Canada, but we also look at them by ideological subgroup of these extremist groups on Facebook. And we explore why certain reactions were commonly assigned to certain far-right themes and narratives on Facebook. And we suggest that the use of these reactions provides a generative mechanism for user engagement, user resonance, and also for referential meaning. But also that reactions can reaffirm and incrementally shape the moral intuitions of far-right sympathisers on Facebook to consider extremist goals as reasonable. So a very quick side note before we go any further at this stage is necessary. A side note on emotion. We acknowledge that emotions are fleeting and they're flurried by moment-to-moment existence. They're not static. We also acknowledge that emotions and emoji reactions in particular are not accurate representations of the complexity of human emotions, and also that the psychology behind each reaction is ultimately unknown.
So speaking of emotion, emotions are understood as crucial mental states that have profound effect on our internal psychological life, as well as intersubjective experience. Among their many psychological contributions, emotions guide decision-making and judgment. So as a kind of intuitive cognition, emotions are an additional layer of evolutionary rationality. And this serves as a heuristic that helps us to appraise and remember our interactions with others. For instance, emotions signal whether someone is behaving culturally or morally appropriate or suitable to the social context, and more importantly, how to treat them. So in the context of the far right, if a sympathetic user resonates with a piece of far right content on social media, their emotion helps to regulate their interpretation of the identities depicted and how to treat them. This means that our moral intuitions are heavily regulated by our emotion. And once biased by emotion, our individual moral intuitions are later interpreted using a kind of post hoc rationalization. These post hoc rationalizations often provide a sense of credibility to the individual's existing set of expectations or beliefs or expected outcomes, and this actually helps to justify their behavioral response. This means that your emotion and your reasoning guide your behavior in ways that are thought of as reasonable. Aside from fringe beliefs, and rationalizations, emotions play a pivotal regulatory role in constructing each far-right extremist psychological and moral reality. Narratives are built, of course, on sustained and shared emotion. Narratives provide an intellectual scaffold to support layers of moral architecture. They shape our moral psychological impressions of one another. And in this way, far-right narratives are also a cultural medium that channels and coalesces moments of shared emotion in reference to these schemas of moral reasoning. So this regulates a perception of who is an us and who is a them, and again, how to treat them. Far-right narratives are sustained online via the content posted on social media. Such content is designed to emotionally bait users and to adopt the cultural norms and goals that are upheld by far-right ideology. This incrementally, we suggest, shapes the moral intuition to believe that what they're pursuing is reasonable norms and laudable goals. Compared to other graphicons, such as emoticons, GIFs, stickers, images, as well as videos, there is an overwhelming preference for emojis on social media. So due to a range of distinctive features, users have characterized emojis as familiar, cute, imaginative, expressive, accurate, cheerful, intimate, as well as meaningful. This characterization is significant because it highlights how effective emojis are at generating feelings and ascribing personality traits depending on its use. So emojis, they can represent an emotional expression such as the anger face that you see up on the slide, an animate being, as you can see is the woman wearing a hijab, or an inanimate object such as a nation's flag. However, emojis also have a referential function, which means that they refer to an extra-linguistic partnership between multiple modes of meaning. What this means is that emojis can be simultaneously an icon, as well as a symbol and a word. Emojis in this way infer a broad spectrum of meaning that varies depending on the cultural use and the user's emotional and moral reading. Functionally, this can represent an adjective, or a verb, or even an entire proposition, such as the sequence of emojis that you see in the second line there on the slide. In February 2016, Facebook, in response to a request to promptly and communally share emotion, the platform introduced a selection of modified emoji-based affordances that are graphically designed to represent certain emotions as well as certain emotional expressions, and they're referred to collectively as reactions. This is the series of emojis you can see on the top right hand side of the slide. However, in contrast to the over 3,000 emojis that you can see on your phone, for example, which represent variations and gradations in emotional expression, Facebook's reactions actually restrict a user's lexicon to 6 emotional extremes, and inhibits the user from partnering it with a linguistic phrase, right, from partnering it with any words. Facebook announced that reaction usage helps to decide what content rises to the surface of a user's newsfeed by weighting the reactions a little more than likes when taking into account how relevant the content is. Therefore, when a reaction is assigned to a post, this partnership produces an ambiguous proposition that is emotionally expressive and is more likely to appear in the newsfeed of similar users. So let's look at some examples. Depending on its design, social media affordances are devised to allow a user certain kinds of behavior and experiences. The qualities and utility associated with each affordance is conditioned by their perception of the affordance. However, to understand the qualities and utility of each affordance, some cultural understanding, right, of the juncture between emojis, users, and the content is required. Focusing on the case of far-right extremism, each reaction and its qualities are viewed in part through the lens of far-right ideology. And the utility of its ambiguous proposition is ideologically pertinent depending on the specific far-right narrative in which it's assigned to. For instance, consider which reaction a sympathetic follower of far-right extremism would use on a post that depicts a member of an outgroup, such as a woman in a hijab or an Antifa member. Far-right ideology generally reflects an aggressive reactionary tendency towards novel or confronting identities, such as the ones you can see on the slide. If the user resonates with these narratives, the affordance prompts the user to assign the reaction that emotionally aligns with the norms and goals upheld by far-right ideology. Furthermore, because these narratives are negatively valenced and they depict a threat, it is more likely to elicit negative emotions and increase the willingness of a user to engage the content using a negative affective response, such as the anger reaction. And you can actually see the number of times users have used either anger reaction or sad or haha on each one of these example posts. Again, because Facebook's algorithm considers reactions to be an even stronger signal that a user wants to see that type of post, these posts, such as the ones on the slides, have a referential proposition that is repurposed as a signal for others in the online community to navigate its ambiguity and make similar associations. Over time, these associations become more and more popular in the online community, and this will likely lead to a larger proportion of users to emotionally consider the morally precarious propositions as dangerously reasonable.
So what did we do? In this study, we used a mixed methods approach to conduct a cross-national comparative analysis of administrator posts containing 4.5 million user reactions. And these were present across 30 Australian and 29 Canadian far-right Facebook group pages over the years between 2016 and 2019. As you know, the purpose of the study was to assess the frequency and proportionate use of these 6 reactions, and we looked at them across 2 layers of analysis. One was between Australia and Canada, the other one was by ideological sub-movement. Now, each group was coded into an Australian and a Canadian sample, and also into an anti-Islamic, a cultural superiority, or a racial superiority ideological sub-movement. We then identified and thematically analysed the types of posts, the themes and the narratives that generated the most user engagement specific to the top 3 reactions: love, haha and anger. And we explored why certain reactions may have been commonly assigned to certain far-right themes and narratives on Facebook between these different layers of analysis. So what were our findings? This paper presents fundamental research into a new area, and our initial findings show some very clear commonalities and differences between reaction use by far-right group members in Australia and also in Canada. Users within the Canadian sample, for instance, utilised sad, they utilised haha and wow at a greater percentage rate than users within the Australian sample. Users within the Australian nationwide sample, on the other hand, employed love proportionately more so than users in the Canadian sample. Reactions such as thankful remained consistently at a very low percentage rate across both of the samples. So in the nationwide sample, users of Australian far-right extremist groups reused a very narrow cast of reactions, while their Canadian counterparts employed a more proportionate use of most of these reactions. Now, in terms of ideological sub-movements, when we break these groups down into these 3 ideological subtypes, the anti-Islamist groups, the cultural superiority groups, and the racial superiority groups, we also see some very marked differences in reaction use. In Australia, anti-Islamic groups used anger and ha-ha more so than any other reaction. Cultural superiority groups employed love, ha-ha and wow more than users of anti-Islamic groups. However, users within groups coded as racial superiority reacted to content using ha-ha more so than users who operate in either the cultural superiority or the anti-Islamic groups. In Canada, anti-Islamic groups used anger more so than any other reaction. However, unlike the Australian sub-movement sample, Canadian racial superiority groups employed anger at a greater proportionate percentage rate than other sub-movements in the Canadian sample. Another cross-national distinction is that racial superiority groups in the Canadian sample reacted to content using haha, notably less than users within anti-Islamic groups or cultural superiority groups. Each Australian sub-movement recycled one or two reactions at a significantly higher percentage rate relative to other reactions, while every sub-movement in the Canadian sample utilised love, sad, wow and haha at a relatively consistent proportionate percentage rate.
So let's look at some of these trends. So across both Australia and the Canadian FarRight Facebook accounts, the anger reaction was most often assigned to narratives that depicted an other. This aligns with previous research which highlighted certain identities such as Muslim, Islamic, Trudeau, and liberal as featuring among the most used terms in administrative posts across Australian and Canadian FarRight groups on Facebook. These identities were most often framed by administrators as negative or a threatening presence within society, and users who resonated with this framing and the content were likely to reciprocate with an anger reaction. This makes sense as far-right extremism is dominated by concerns about the other, and sympathizers are captured by a paranoid perception of the other as being a causal mechanism for society's ills, and feel immediate exclusionary action against this identity group, against the other, is necessary. Here, anger's popularity and the narratives in which they're assigned is not only characteristic of far-right ideology, but it suggests that anti-other sentiment invites a stabilizing sense of solidarity, right? It says, that anger affords, followers of far-right extremist groups to collectively hail. Together we hate, and this hate is what makes us together. When the subject of anger and discontent is the other, the anger reaction can emotionally prime a user's moral intuition to then further rationalize their beliefs against the other. Furthermore, anger's popularity and its dangerously broad spectrum of referential meaning is again rebroadcast back to the online community. For sympathizers of far-right extremism, the anti-other norms upheld by far-right ideology propose violent, ends-orientated solutions to remove the other from society. And this is represented in the content they post online, and the users can emotionally and morally resonate with this content, in part using Facebook's reactions. Now, narratives, events, or persons that positively reflect a far-right identity or value were commonly assigned the love reaction by users in Australian and Canadian far-right extremist groups on Facebook. Positive affirmations of one's identity and values invites moments of shared affection and couches feelings of belonging. Within the context of far-right ideology, one's national, cultural, or racial identity serves as an axiomatic claim to various entitlements, privileges, and positive treatment. Among others, these identity markers were often positively framed by administrators to try and elicit positive feelings, right, and encourage positive affective responses such as the love reaction. However, love also produces an array of referential meaning that can shape a user's moral intuition as well as their existing beliefs in ways that is not entirely benign. Positive affirmations of one's identity group or ideology can also be leveraged to justify violence in order to protect the strict boundary between us and them, and more importantly, how to treat them. We are also in the process of analyzing the use of the haha reaction. So far, we have examined a lot of the far-right content and the narratives in which haha is most commonly assigned, and it seems as if haha is readily used to mock, ridicule, or degrade those who are depicted in the content, such as the example you can see on the slide, or highlight an occasion where normative conventions of sociocultural or moral expectations were intentionally violated, usually by those who are either a part of the far-right movement or at least in favor of one aspect of far-right ideology.
So to conclude, our results highlight the anger, the love, and the ha-ha reactions as very effective generative mechanisms for user engagement and also resonance with far-right themes and narratives, while producing a dangerously broad spectrum of referential meaning with possible moral and ideological implications. Anger can prime a user's moral intuition to further rationalise their anti-other beliefs and justify violent ends-oriented solutions. Love can signify a positive affirmation of one's identity group and ideology, which can be leveraged to justify violence in order to protect us from them. While being emoji-based, reactions can also produce a referential proposition that abrogates complex realities into persuasive, personal narratives based on the user's pre-existing presuppositions, beliefs, and biases. Once assigned to a far-right narrative by sympathetic followers of far-right extremism, a reaction produces a dangerously broad spectrum of referential meaning that is likely to be interpreted in accordance with far-right ideology. Effective as a generative mechanism for user engagement, user resonance and referential meaning, reactions can also reaffirm and incrementally shape the moral intuitions of sympathetic users to consider far-right extremist goals as increasingly essential, as praiseworthy, or as pressing. Social media is designed to incentivize immediate engagement, and the algorithm is programmed to register immediate responses to content and then preferentially reallocate it. In this way, social media is conducive to the most unintelligible aspects of the group mind. By prompting users to engage isolated particles of ideology using their emotional intuition and then broadcast these moral judgments to the online community. It is expected that social media will continue to be an important feature of far-right extremist communities, and therefore it's important, we believe, to understand further how emotion-evoking affordances may influence the moral and ideological realities of extremist users. Now, we thank you very much for listening to the presentation. We hope that it is useful and of interest to you all, and we're very, very happy to take any and all questions over the 2 days of this fascinating conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking forward to chatting.